So I'm Anthony Waddington. I'm the Chief Executive of a charity called Participate. We're based in Bradford, but we work across the UK, and we help people to think about their organisations and how they might be structured and how they might then develop into really successful and sustainable things. And this was the question that I was sort of set, was how do we find the right legal structure for something like the Culture Hub? Which is a pretty challenging question, particularly when you've only got 30 minutes, but I'm sure we'll do all right. Because the answer is, there is no one right answer. I'll see you all later. No, there is no one right answer. And if you look across the country, what you see for these types of buildings is you see all sorts of different types of legal structures being used. And the legal structures reflect a number of things about the organisation. So really, when I say there's no right answer, what I'm really saying is that there are only the right questions to ask, to think about how you want a building to work for a community, how you want it to be sustainable. And I think that these are the questions that you need to be asking yourself. So the first one is, what's the purpose of it? What are you trying to achieve? What are the goals of the organisation? And how much do you need to protect those goals for the future? How much do you need to make sure that that purpose that you've set for a building is retained? The second one is about how you intend to fund the build of it and the fitting out of it and the capital costs of creating it, because the legal structure that you choose, the form that you choose for an organisation can have a massive impact on the ability to raise money, particularly in the early stages. The third one, which is kind of related to the second, is then how do we make it sustainable? How do we make it financially sustainable? So what's the financial model we're going to use for this? We've got this beautiful culture hub being built right in the heart of Wythenshawe. The last thing that we want to see happen to it is that it survives for a few years and then disappears. And unfortunately, that's not an uncommon thing when you look at these types of buildings. They're built, they sustain for a short period of time, and then the money becomes too hard to find. Yeah? So choosing the right structure for it can have a really big impact on whether or not it's possible to keep it going during that period. Fourth one, which I think is really important, we're going to talk about this in a little bit more detail in a minute, is about who owns it. Whose is it? You know, we have a building being built, we have an idea, but does that idea belong to a group of people who set it up, the founders, the people who made it? Does it belong to the artists and art community of a place? Does it belong to the wider community of a place? And it comes back again when you think about this to some of the stuff around what's the purpose of it, what you're trying to achieve by putting this building into a place. What are you hoping will happen because you've got it? Are you building communities? Are you providing a place for people to meet? Are you trying to encourage entrepreneurship and, you know, drive up the economy of a place? And thinking about that, and then thinking about whose plan that is. Is this a plan of the council? Is it a plan of the developer? Is it a plan of the community? Is it a plan of a small section of the community? It can really define what you want that space to be. Fifth one, really important, once you get to that point of thinking about who it belongs to, what liability and risk are they willing to take? So, you know, different structures you might choose for an organisation change what liability and risk the individuals who are running it, owning it, managing it, part of it, take on in the process of doing the same. And the last question on there, which is absolutely essential, is what does the legal structure that you choose mean in terms of the cost of running the building? Because what we have in this country is a very complex and difficult set of different legal structures, from charities through social enterprises and community interest companies and not-for-profit companies, through things like cooperatives and community benefit societies. And all of these things have different rules around taxation, around rates, around the things that they have to pay, but also different opportunities to get money. So I think that what a community needs to do when they're thinking about a building like this is to ask themselves these questions, and really to ask them in this order, because I think the most important thing of all is purpose. Form follows function. You know, you find out what you want to do with a thing, and then you pick the thing that best fits that purpose. So the first one, purpose and protection of purpose, and the questions that we ask when we're doing this are kind of, are the purposes of the organisation exclusively charitable? If I want this thing to be a charity, I have to be able to answer that question as a yes. And if I can't answer that question as a yes, I've either got to have a charity and something else, or I've got to look at another legal structure.
Anthony,
yeah.
Really sorry to interrupt. Could somebody from Manchester City Council or the Housing Group just give us a quick, how much do we know so far about who the partners will be in the Culture Club and how much has been decided about what will happen in it? Is everything still undecided or are some things already set?
I think the idea is to set up a company.
In terms of like these questions, what are the purposes of it and things like that? What's your sense of what's already the vision?
Well, it's a culture hub, and we need to have that as its charitable aim, arts and culture, to be a charity. So that's the kind of, using things like home as an example of what's been set up in other parts of the city, what needs to be different.
Sorry, I just thought that might be a bit.
It's really useful, because one of the things that we can look at is that there are examples, really good examples in Manchester of things that have been done, particular ways of doing this, but there are also other examples elsewhere and in Manchester, but in other parts of the country, about how you might structure it and what change that makes in terms of how much the community owns a place and other ways of raising money. Yeah, sure.
No, it's a really interesting conversation, and because we did have the briefing with News and the council. I think you had it and we had it. And part of it is renting out space to artists, studio space, and performance spaces and cafe. But it makes me realize everything you're saying is at an earlier stage, actually, because a lot of things are for consumption. And you know, home is my second home, but I go there mostly as a consumer of art and food, but there is a bit of space at home for community engagement and community art, etc. And to have that conversation, I mean, not now, but what actually, what the mix can be in the model the News and the council is thinking of. Where's the way? Because I mean, obviously some money has to be earned, so nobody is, you know, sort of, you know, it needs to have income. But how far can these things be pushed to have a community activity? And from what you're saying, I realize that we didn't have that conversation initially, sort of, to that extent. Yeah, I feel, I mean, you know, say if I'm not, if I'm wrong. But
I mean, I think we will talk about some of the stakeholder consultation that happened prior to this as well, when we, in a moment, as part of looking at stuff on it. But I think sometimes what happens is, you know, the idea is there, and the idea is a good idea. The building, the outline plan of it, has multiple different potential uses and multiple uses actually written into it in its current version. But for me, there's a really big question about making sure that these buildings are sustainable, and we've seen far too many of them be started and fail, or more frequently what happens is they start, fail, and then are resurrected in another form that was the form they should have been in the first place. And we see that across, you know, we see that across the country. We see that something created, it runs for a bit, it fails. My offices are in a building that was done by Urban Splash in Bradford. Beautiful community art space in a building, set up in a way that just was never going to generate the income, and given the wrong spaces within it to generate income. And because of that, it failed after 3 years and is now in the process of being reopened and reimagined as something different. And I think, you know, it's kind of about avoiding that, really, is the fundamental part of this. So thinking about purpose, we're talking about who are the beneficiaries. Who benefits from this? Because when you put a big building into the middle of a community, put it into a space in a very prominent place in a community, you know, in a building that people have a history with and that sort of thing. If it's not seen as being part of that community and for that community, then you create another issue for that building, because it stops being something that people see as something they want to use. There's lots of technical questions like, do you want to asset lock the organisation, which means creating, making sure that its assets can only be used for the purpose with which you created it. And a charitable company does exactly that. That's a really, really good model for doing that. And the last one, of course, is whatever you put in there, are you expecting it to do anything that's political, which would rule out a whole set of other things. A lot of arts organisations become quite political in what they do, and sometimes find that they have the wrong legal structure to enable them to do that. Other arts organisations are exactly the opposite and kind of apolitical, not really in that space. Yeah.
Is there a definition of what counts as political activity? Obviously, supporting a political party would be, but is it to say we want more social homes? Is that political?
So this is exactly where the difficulty lies with this. So if I create a charitable company, charities have a degree of protection around campaigning around their purpose. So they're allowed to lobby politicians to say, we're trying to achieve this charitable purpose, therefore we would like you to do this. Yeah? However, community interest companies, which is one other possible model that some of these things are set up as, the regulator, the CIC regulator, takes a much more robust attitude to the definition of political campaigning. And it includes all of that stuff in it. So it says we don't want to see you lobbying. We don't want to see you doing anything that's trying to change policy. Yeah? And so for certain organisations that have set up as CICs and then find themselves in a space where they want to say to their local politicians, we need more of this in this community, they find that can hamstring them, and they end up with complaints to the regulator, which then means that the regulator comes back and says, you've got to stop doing that, or you'll have your status stripped from you. Just fall back to being a limited company at that point, which is deeply unhelpful in terms of fundraising and finance and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. Really good question though, because the definition is not very well set, and I think you've seen in recent years, you've seen some really difficult conversations about what charities can and can't do. So particularly around the Brexit vote and COVID, charities were being given quite strong messages to say you're not allowed to campaign on this except within this very, very limited frame that we can set for you. So it really does change sometimes with who is in government, how, and who's the current chair of the Charity Commission can change that sort of thing. So when we talk about trying to make something sustainable or trying to build it in the first place, fundamentally what we're saying, what type of money is going to go into that building? So the question is, what do you need to be able to do as an organisation? And the first one is access significant grant funding. So do you think you're going to be run, and grant is going to make up quite a lot of that? You're going to be applying to the lottery, the Arts Council, the 8,800 foundations that are out there. The second one is, are you going to trade around your purpose? So charities are very effective at trading around their purpose, but are you also going to want to do some stuff that is not about your purpose, trading outside of your purpose? So your purpose might be to promote the arts, so anything that you do that promotes the arts is trading to your purpose, but you might also want to do something over here that just generates money, and how do you structure that, and what risk can the charity take in doing that? Question. Then you get to the more complicated ones. So attracting social investment, taking on loans and mortgages, offering community shares, which is a really important part of a lot of arts organisations' approaches to engaging the community, creating accountability and creating ownership. Only certain organisations can do that. And finally, maximising income from donations. So across all the different legal structures, things change depending on which one you pick about which of these things you can do. And the reason I said there's no one good answer is that whichever structure you take, you go, I'm going to pick to be a CBS, I'm going to be really good at getting community shares. I'm allowed to do it, I'm able to issue a share offer, but I'm going to suddenly find it much more difficult to do some other stuff on this list than a charity would. So it's always a balancing act between the different ways that you might make money, thinking, and you have to kind of think about what your financial model is ahead of choosing your legal structure. And what often happens is people choose the legal structure and then try to make the money work. And I think there's a really important thing there about the ordering of your decision-making process. So here's something that was said in the stakeholder consultation. We want to give communities a sense of ownership and involvement in its operation with appropriate support. So this is fundamentally about accountability and ownership. Who owns the organisation? Yeah, is it the people? Is it a particular group of people? Is it members? Is it just the trustees? Yeah. Who is the actual people who own that organisation? Are there, do things like the local authority have a charitable sort of role within that as a corporate trustee of it? Who has a say in what it does? So can members decide the direction it takes, or is that decision made by a group of trustees, or in the case of some organisations, just by an individual organisation that acts as a corporate trustee? And how can you hold it to account? So if local people feel like it's not doing the things that they would like to see happen, do they have any mechanism to be able to say, I don't like this and we would like to see some other stuff happen? Can they hold it to account in any way? How much direct control do trustees and directors have? Have you got a membership structure, and are you using the version of membership or ownership? They are different. Some things have members, some things actually are owned by the people who have shares in it. And then the last one, which is quite important, when you then go on to recruiting trustees, can it pay its trustees and directors? So charities obviously generally can't do that, but there are other organisations that can do that, and sometimes that can be a benefit. And then the fundamental things around operating and trading costs are business rates, being the first one, that there is a statutory business rate rebate for charities of 80%, so rate relief of 80%. There is a business rate relief for businesses that scales from 100% at the bottom, but very quickly becomes zero as you move up. There is also then discretionary rate relief, which councils can give to other types of not-for-profit organisations, but increasingly don't. Yeah. So as you move different structures, you change how big your rate bill is likely to be. And for a building of the size that we're talking about, that could be the thing that makes or breaks the budget of it. The second one is corporation tax. Charities get treated much better for corporation tax purposes than other types of organisations. Charities, and I'm including in that organisations that are considered to be charitable by HMRC. So they've got charity registration either with the Charity Commission or with HMRC. They get much better conditions around trading, in particular around trading around their purpose. So anything you do, like if you're an arts organisation, renting studio space, renting the space in your building for arts activities, that sort of stuff becomes automatically exempt from corporation tax. And that again can make a huge difference to whether or not your money just stacks up. Charities also get better treatment with VAT. Yeah, it's not quite as good as people might hope it would be in terms of what you get, but you do get different treatment with VAT. But then sometimes in the process of building things, other types of organisations are better at reclaiming VAT. Then there's the cost of governance, just simply running an organisation and having multiple regulators. So charitable companies are regulated by the Charity Commission and Companies House. That costs more money in terms of production of accounts. It costs more money in terms of reporting to Companies House than some other structures. And the last one, which I think is really important, is does your structure lend itself to people giving you stuff and helping you? And again, charities are the one that, the sort of the brand of charity lends itself to going to a corporate partner and saying, can you give us some support? Can you help us through your social value commitments? All of those sort of things. So, another thing that it said in the research that was done before was that what people wanted to see was it was informed by and emulating other exemplars of multi-use, flexible, community-based, creative and cultural spaces in Greater Manchester and further afield. Now, I think you're all perfectly good at looking at Manchester, so I haven't brought any Manchester with me, because I think you know the organisations that you want to look at here, but I thought I'd give you some examples from around the country of other things and what they've done. So community interest company limited by guarantee. I've ruled out community interest company limited by shares because it just doesn't work, and I really can't even begin to think I could make it work. But the pros of that: asset lock protects mission, flexible. It can apply for grants. Yeah, for quite a few grants. You can't apply for every grant. You can take loans. Very importantly. Smaller buildings, it might actually get better rate of relief than for a charity, but in the case of this, it wouldn't. The cons: no charitable rate reliefs or gift aid. Some funders only support charities. Larger buildings may qualify for discretionary rate relief, but that can just be pulled by a council if they want to, or they can not grant it. And it can't engage in a wide range of activities deemed as political. But it's not an uncommon way that people structure these organisations. So this is Art for Space in Lambeth in London. This is an art centre based, it's sort of behind a set of houses. It's a lot bigger than it looks in that picture, and it occupies quite a big footprint. Why have they chosen it? Why does it work with them? Well, because they've got a very balanced set of income between grants and trading income. So CICs are quite good at doing both of those things. They're not as good as a charity at getting grants. They're probably about the best you can get as a structure for doing some types of trading. Lambeth was still offering discretionary rate relief, so that enabled this building to not pay rates. And then the most important thing is that this was set up by founders, and founders want to sit on their own board, but they nearly always want to be paid as well. And so from the perspective of wanting to do that, this is pretty much the only real structure you can choose other than a limited company without CIC status. And so this last one drives people down that route, that the founder wants to sit on the board and they want to be paid, they want to access grants, they want to do all of that stuff, and the only way they can do it is by choosing that structure.
I was going to ask why Art for Space would choose to be a charity. I think you sounded it because basically
that's it, yeah.
It's purely because the person who founded it wanted to get paid.
Yeah. Right. So they could have chosen to be the chief executive.
Yeah.
But then their board could have sacked them and they could have set something up. Yeah. They are the chief executive. They're the chief executive and a director. Yeah. And that prevents them, protects their position on the organisation.
Yeah, but as well, if they've been a charity, they've not been able to draw a salary.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I mean, some charities can, but you have to get permission to the charity commission. It's hard to get that sort of thing approved. They often just allow you to do it for a short period of time after you're set off with the expectation that you move away from doing it. The standard charitable company, which is a really, really frequent way these things are established, and particularly in the past, this was absolutely normal for organisations to set up in this way. Biggest thing, able to fundraise easily. Grant funding is easy for these organisations. Really, trusted by donors, gets gift aid. Easy is a funny word, Tom, I know. But by the standards of all the different types of organisations, this is the one that's most likely to get a grant if it puts on. Receives charitable tax reliefs on trade activities, 80% mandatory rate reliefs. There's lots of things that are playing to say this is a good idea. And have a large or a small membership. So you can build accountability into it by having a membership that can vote on what the organisation does. Or you can keep it small and make it something that's controlled by a very small group of people. And importantly, it can take loans because it can register a charge against on Companies House, which means it can be credit checked. So a lot of the other organisations that we're looking at, credit referencing agencies struggle to credit check them. And so CICs they can, charitable companies they can, but other types are harder to do. And if you can't credit check, you can't give someone a loan. The cons: heaviest regulatory burden. You've got 2 regulators. Trustees can't be paid. We saw that a minute ago. Excluded from some types of funding activity like community share offers, and may need to set up a trading subsidiary to do certain types of trading. So if trading involves significant risk to the charity, they need to divest it from the charity and do it elsewhere.
Can I ask a very quick question?
Yeah, of course.
Just because it relates to that slide and we might move on.
Sure.
When you say that a CIC, because it sounds like that's the model that the City Council are favouring at the moment for the culture as a
charitable company, yeah.
But you said it can have a membership.
Yeah.
So
CIC can do that
a
as well.
CIC can have a membership, and can it have a membership of individuals? Can it have a membership of organisations? What kinds of membership structures do they tend to have?
For the charitable company?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can set a lot of different rules around what your members can be. So you can have corporate memberships if you want to. You can have individual memberships. The Constitution sets that.
So there's lots of different constitutional forms you can select.
Yeah, I mean, you can. There's a model set, but you can alter that to a certain extent that the Charity Commission will accept to allow lots of other things to happen.
And it's the same true of community interest company, the CIC.
Yeah, less so. Let's say directly, the directors of a company are rather more, Companies House kind of thinks about things in a slightly different way, but the membership of a charity can be a little bit more broad. The directors are still normally an individual person, apart from occasionally you get someone who the only trustee of a charity is the local authority, and it has its own charitable board that run. I'm sure you've got parks and all sorts of stuff that are run in that way. House in Wakefield, exactly this organisation, and the key thing here, lots of grant, lots of trading around purpose, loads of stuff like that. But the absolute key thing is they needed a mortgage to buy the building when they started. And in order to get the mortgage, they needed to be an organisation that could raise that mortgage on the commercial market. And so they chose to go down this route. Subsequently, it's been a very successful model for them. You know, the way that it works, they've been able to bring in lots and lots of grant income and trading income, and they benefit from rate relief and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, I've got no qualms that it's a very good structure to use. Charitable incorporations, a more recent form of charity than charitable companies. It basically removes the need to register with Companies House, but it retains the protection of the trustees, so the limited liability of the trustees. And it basically looks exactly the same as the last one in terms of pros and cons, apart from one reversal at the bottom, which is instead of having a fairly high regulatory burden, it has probably the lowest, because the Charity Commission is one of the easiest things to report to, but can't access loan funding as easily as a charitable company can, because it can't register a charge on Companies House, can't be credit checked, so lots of lenders simply won't lend them money. So if your organisation is going to need to borrow money, that's a problem for this structure. Other than that, it's, you know, all other things say you probably put them on a par. Very good example here, Keighley Creative taking on a very similar building to this one. So this is in Keighley, it's a former Argos site. So it's a 4-storey Argos building in a town centre, within a shopping centre complex. So really quite similar, used for a lot of very similar purposes. The main reason that they were able to go for this structure and simplify it is that they don't own the building, and they don't intend to own the building, and they can't own the building. So they know that they're just relying on a lease. So they don't need to take a big loan to do it. They were very confident they weren't going to have to take any big loans to do their work. Certainly not commercial loans. Yeah. Probably we're approaching the end of my time now, aren't I?
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So I'm going to
You
very
can
quickly.
have 5 minutes, like
Thank you.
Andrew.
So very quickly going through community benefit societies, and I'm going to do it quickly, but this is really important, this one, because this is the one that allows communities to own something. This is the one that can create a community share offer that allows people to buy into it and become a shareholder. And it creates these shares that are withdrawable and not transferable. So you can take your money back out, but you can't sell the shares, you can't move them into somebody else. It's an asset-locked organisation. It can be charitable, but it can't be a registered charity. So it can be charitably recognised by HMRC and therefore benefit from the tax benefits of a charity, but it can't be a registered charity. And that's the main big con down there, is that some funders who fund charities specify registered charities rather than saying charities. So this doesn't include the major funders like the Arts Council or the Lottery or some of the really big ones, but lots of the smaller grant-making trusts rely on charity registration as being their kind of default position of how do I know this is a real organisation that has charitable purposes. So they can struggle a bit more to raise grant funding, but they have this opportunity to raise funding from a local community and give that local community ownership in the process. Red Brick Building, Glastonbury, is a really, really good example of that. The CBS was actually set up quite a long time ago, I think something like 2009, but they ended up running a community share offer that raised over £100,000 in their initial thing, and were able to then match that to other funders to do the development of the Arts Centre. It has found that it's been able to attract grants to do its work, and they really feel, you know, this is one where they were very clear right at the beginning. What they wanted to create was something owned by the people of Glastonbury, and that was a fundamental purpose within it. So if your purpose is to create something where the people of Wythenshawe own it, this model is one to consider. When it doesn't work, this is Friction Arts. I do a lot of work with Friction Arts, and they're an absolutely fantastic arts organisation in Birmingham. They're wonderful people to work with. But they set up with a limited company structure. Again, because the founder wanted to be on the board and be paid. They set up before community interest companies existed. They had discretionary rate relief from Birmingham Council, but of course Birmingham Council has been widely reported as in financial trouble and has withdrawn that discretionary rate relief. So suddenly they're getting rates on their building, suddenly they're finding it harder and harder to get grants as a limited company because they have a limited number of grant funders they can go to. Difficult to recruit volunteer directors to something that doesn't have the kind of charity brand attached to it. It's like, will you come and for free be part of our company? It doesn't sort of work very well. So they are currently changing their legal structure right now to be a charitable incorporated organisation. It's just a really good indication of if you get it wrong, you end up giving yourself work somewhere down the line. And then I'm going to sort of lead into Tom after the break slightly by just saying, can't you be more than one thing? Yeah. This is Hastings Commons. So the Hastings Commons own a huge swathe in the middle of Hastings, and are buying up property in the middle of Hastings and acquiring property from the local authority and creating arts centres and housing and you know, a whole range of different office space and youth space across the centre of Hastings. And they have chosen to have multiple legal structures. So there is a community land trust, there is Neighbourhood Ventures, which is a limited company, there is Leisure and Learning, which is an independent charity that works alongside those other organisations, and then there's Living Rents, which is, I think, a housing association. Yeah. So between those four organisations, it gives them loads of flexibility to choose which one you use to do specific things. Yeah. So I want to do something that's purely charitable. I do it through Leisure and Learning. I want to apply for grant funding for youth work. I do it for Leisure and Learning. I want to do something that's much more commercial around taking a big lease on a property over here. I might do it for Neighbourhood Ventures. You know, you do it through the different bits of work. Allows access to wide range of funding, allows purposes to be mixed, but it's incredibly complicated, and you've got to do the governance for 4 organisations instead of 1. So when you're looking at single building, the answer is normally don't do this unless don't make too many organisations attached to a building unless you absolutely have to. Thank you.
Just very quick few minutes for any questions for Anthony, and then we will have a 15-minute break before we have our final chat from Tom about interland trusts.
No questions. I like that. I covered everything. Yes.
If you have to choose which would be the best, that's one.
I mean, again, I come back to that question: what's my purpose? What do I want to see happen? And you know, the council's view of what they want to see happen might differ from the residents' view of what they want to see happen. Might differ from organisations in the room's view of what they want to see happen. If I want to just make a straightforward arts centre for artists, where I just want the artists to be able to raise grant money, I go for a charitable company. If I want the thing to have community ownership and actually build, I mean, I think I would be choosing a charitable company or a community benefit society is the simple answer to that. But which one I choose would entirely depend on what my goals were in doing it.
Gavin or anyone else who knows about it, because we're all learning still. Have there been any discussions about what the process will be through which there can be a collective conversation about how that governance works and answering these questions and discussing these questions?
I don't think so. It's not been confirmed. I think it's something that has been discussed with the community steering group. I think obviously the funding has been sought for levelling up to redo the court building, to get a culture hub, got plan permission. Obviously I think we do want some sort of charitable governance that enables the facility to be self-sustaining, but have sort of community involvement. So it's kind of how we take all the slides that have been helpfully presented to deliver that really. So I don't think it's as we are working, Home are advising us, and they're not going to sort of run it, but they're certainly a key advisor because they've kind of done something similar. And then County Common Section, the sort of organisation helping us with that. So I think it's something that the community steering group will be involved with. I don't think it's not confirmed in terms of like all the detail, but that's the kind of direction.
Maybe on Tuesday, because we see each other all on Tuesday, we can sort of discuss where we can go with this.
Yes, it's not been decided like who will be the trustees and directors of charitable companies yet. There's some ideas, but
I think that would be great, wouldn't it, if there could be a collective conversation with the community and faith sector and voluntary sector across the Wythenshawe area about some of these questions, so that everybody gets to have a say on how that building gets managed, would make people feel included and part of the process.
I'll say one thing on that, which I'm really, really certain about. Buildings that communities value and feel ownership of are more likely to be successful than buildings that they don't. And, you know, that leans into what Sophie's saying over there about the more you've engaged people in the decision about it, the more likely you are to make it work.
Yeah, just to say, I sit on the Wythenshawe Creative Partnership. So, Creative Partnership, we're looking at creative, but we're also going to be feeding in, there's going to be some consultation around the cultural containers, and I guess what the community wants to see there and what people are looking for from that, and I guess that will inform what the purpose of the building is. It also that conversation with the community needs to happen first and foremost, because unless you know what it actually is going to look like and what the purpose of it is, I guess that's really difficult to make those governance decisions, isn't it?
And I don't want this to sound like a criticism of council's talk, because it isn't. You know, councils see an opportunity to get an excellent thing put into a community during a major development and take it, quite rightly, and take the opportunity of the money and the development stuff to do that. Yeah, it's kind of, in a way though, it is a kind of a ask about face sort of approach, because what you'd normally expect to happen is that people go, I want something, and then you do it. And you've built all of the structure of what it will be before you start thinking about what it will look like. But, you know, you take the opportunities you've got, don't you?
Where's the money?
Exactly. And of course you take the money when it's available. And then it's just about thinking about, how you make it sustainable over time. And, you know, having seen some of these buildings just simply be built and then be mothballed very, very quickly in some cases, or sometimes after 10 years they just stop working. You know, I think having a bit of a step back once you know you're going to do it and say, let's ask some of these questions is just a good idea.
Sorry, I'm finding it difficult to hear.
Sorry.
I think what I'm hearing you say is what we actually need to do is consult the community about what they want that space to be before we actually start thinking about how we
Structure it.
How it's
Yeah.
You're right.
I think that's fair, yeah. Absolutely.